I also know that 30 years later, he was much revered and much respected for that decision because he made it without regard to what it would do to him politically.
But, Mr. Vice President, people would say back to you, wait a minute, you govern in the present, not by what some historian is going to say 50 years from now. The idea in a democratic society of having the disapproval of an overwhelming majority of the American people, does that work?
That's what elections are for, Jim.
Mm-hmm.
And as I say, we went out and stood for election and were re-elected comfortably. But you cannot, in these circumstances especially, start worrying about the polls in terms of whether or not you're going to make these tough decisions. The easy thing to do is, well, let's not do terror surveillance. Let's not have a robust interrogation program of these Al-Qaeda folks when we capture them. Let's not take aggressive action to defend the nation, because then the New York Times will love us, we'll get editorials written about us all over the country, and our numbers will go up in the polls. That's not what we came to town to do. We came to town to make those tough decisions. I think the President of the United States is the only one who can make those kinds of decisions. This President did it. I think he did it very well. I think he's been tough and aggressive when he needed to be, and been willing to take the political heat, which is more important, in my opinion, than being loved.
More important than having the approval of the people who elected you?
Well, how are you going to measure that? You want to go out and poll and say, well,
no,
gee, we aren't up to 70% yet, we better not make any tough decisions here. I mean, you cannot be driven by the polls. The polls change all the time. They're easily manipulated by whoever wants to ask those poll questions. They go up, they go down. You've got to steer a more steady course than that if you're going to be President of the United States in these circumstances. And that's what we did. And you guys get to go on the tube every night and comment on it. There's a lot of debate out there about it. The public gets to decide whether or not they want to continue us in office. Well, obviously we weren't up in 08, but they certainly did in 04.
So it doesn't trouble you at all to be leaving office next week with the overwhelming disapproval of the majority of the people as measured by the polls?
Well,
that doesn't bother you personally?
I don't buy that. No, I don't.
You don't
First
buy
of all, I don't buy that. And I find when I get out and talk with people that that's not the unanimous view as you would have it. The things that count for me in terms of the people I want to make certain are with us are, for example, the American military, the young men and women who serve, the folks who go out and put their lives on the line to carry out the policies we've decided upon. President and I had the opportunity, for example, last Saturday. We went down to Norfolk. We commissioned a brand new aircraft carrier named after his father. Then we went over and spent the afternoon with about 650 Navy SEALs. These are guys that have been in the battle in Iraq, in Afghanistan, deployed many, many times, have done all the heavy lifting in connection with our policies that we've pursued in that part of the world. And they are a magnificent group of people. They also are very, very supportive of what we did. And they're the ones who went out and as I say, put their lives on the line for the rest of us. It's not just cocktail party talk for them. This is the real world they live in. And having their respect and their approval counts for an enormous amount.
On a more personal level, Mr. Vice President, there's one thesis that the Dick Cheney, who's been the Vice President for the last 8 years, is a different Dick Cheney, who had been a member of Congress, who had been in the previous administrations of Bush 1 as well as the Ford administration, that somehow you changed dramatically, significantly. Is that correct?
Well, I'm older.
Okay.
I've got less hair. I don't think I've changed in terms of sort of my basic fundamental philosophy or personality. My family doesn't think that I've changed. As I say, to get older, I have more grandkids now than I used to have.
Yeah.
I think what was significant for me was 9/11. And I think it's easy if you didn't experience that, or if you're not worried about it now because it was 7 years ago, easy to forget what that entailed or what that involved. But that was a devastating attack on the United States, killed nearly 3,000 Americans, worst attack ever on the history of on the homeland. And when you contemplated the consequences of it, what it meant with respect to the possibility of terrorists in the middle of our cities with a nuclear weapon, which is now the threat we're faced with, then it seems to me you're justified and indeed obligated to focus on that threat and do everything you can to defeat it. Now, the President and I took an oath when we were sworn in January of '01 to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And when you sit there every day and read the intelligence every morning, 6 days a week, and look at what we're faced with out there on a global basis, and look at the threat and the determination, if you will, of our enemies to come kill more Americans, that's our problem. That's our job to deal with that. We're the ones who've got to sit down every day and figure out how to cope with that. And that's what we did. And now some people can say, gee, Cheney changed. No, I think circumstances changed. I think the United States was no longer safe and secure behind its oceans. I think we found ourselves in a situation where, because of modern technology and the rise of Islamic fundamentalism in the Middle East, we're faced with a threat the likes of which we've never had to deal with before.
So in this same context, people say you hardened, became less willing to compromise, less interested in a bipartisan approach to things. That is a result. If that happened, that came as a result of 9/11 and the new attitude that you just explained.
Well, I think in terms of partisanship or lack of partisanship, that's Joe Lieberman's my favorite Democrat. Joe's a great guy, and he agrees with us on these issues. I think the significant thing is that the American people need to realize and need to be aware that the threat does exist and that we still have to continue those policies. And the interesting thing to watch now is how President-elect Obama is going to adjust to these concerns. He's reading the morning intelligence report now on a daily basis. He's finding out what the nature of the threat is out there, and they're wrestling with this question of what are they going to do with Guantanamo, what are they going to do with terrorist surveillance program or the interrogation program for high-value detainees. And it'll be interesting to see how he resolves those. It would be my personal view. If they don't continue those policies, they will in fact put the nation at risk. We'll see.
A specific question related to that. Lead story in the Washington Post this morning is about a Bush administration official, Susan Crawford, who said on the record that she had recommended against charging one of the detainees at Guantanamo, a native of Saudi Arabia, because he had in fact been tortured at Guantanamo. And she made this comment here. She said, this is Susan Crawford, who used to work for you, I understand,
She
right?
worked in the department when I was there, correct.
When you were at the Pentagon. She said, I think someone should acknowledge that mistakes were made and that they hurt the effort, meaning the whole effort in Guantanamo dealing with terrorists, quote, and take responsibility for it, end quote. You agree with her?
Well, I don't know the specifics of what she's talking about.
You had not heard about this Saudi Arabia situation?
I'd heard about this individual before. This is Mr.